We have quorum.
All right, welcome everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a few final people entering the room, but we'll get through the opening information. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely, electronically, or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast of this meeting. Public will have an opportunity to provide comments during the public comment portion of the agenda and can also provide written testimony to the board by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. And apologies, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Amy Archer Masters, staff for the Portland Utility Board. The pub believes and acts upon anti-racist principles in our meeting spaces and interactions with pub. While every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, particularly any conduct that is targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. This means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth. We put these principles into action by being active and deliberate, speaking up and speaking out. Each person is empowered to maintain the culture of the Portland Utility Board, and we focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, not the person. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, who you're addressing. The chat box is only viewable by pub staff, myself, and Jonna Lynn. Please limit chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for assistance, or reminding us if you've had your hand raised and have been waiting to speak. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. We may lower your hand once you begin speaking just to maintain the flow of the conversation. During public comment periods, the public can also raise their hand and you'll be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos can be turned on when speaking. If desired, it is not required. We ask that you mute your microphone when you're not speaking. If you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *6 to mute and unmute. As mentioned, public comment will be taken during the comment period early in the meeting. You can sign up through chat with myself or Jonna Lynn or raise your hand during that comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board vote after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. So the agenda today is focused on hearing from the utility bureaus on their budget development proposals. So we're going to quickly try to get through to that. And then we have some quick announcements at the end. But let's get through the opening items, including any disclosures of communication as an opportunity for particularly voting board members, if there's any communications with city staff that's relevant to pub's work. Now is your time to share that. All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so I'm going to move on to public comment. I've not received anything in advance. Jonna Lynn, let me know if you have. Otherwise, if a member of public is in the room, you can unmute yourself now or raise your hand and we will take your comment.
I have not received anything in advance.
Go ahead, Jim, if you had comment. I didn't hear whether you had anything to say, Jim, or if you were just saying that you did not have comment today. If you want to follow up, if you could send me a chat or let us know, and we can always circle back around to it as well. All right, we will come back if we need to, but otherwise I'm going to move on to the acceptance of the minutes that have been sent out. So board members have received the draft minutes from the December 19th and January 7th meeting. Thank you, Jonna Lynn, for getting those out so quickly with back-to-back weeks. Do folks have any edits or changes? All right, I'm not seeing any, so we will accept the minutes as they were provided. Also, just for the record, Jim did confirm that they did not have comment today, so we will continue to move forward. So we are going to hear from the utility bureaus today. So let me just pull up the presentation, and then I welcome Cecilia and I'm not sure who's speaking, so I'll just open the floor to you all and let you introduce yourselves, Farshad, and I see the directors are in the room as well. So give me just a second to share your slides. And if everybody can see that, seeing general thumbs up. So go ahead, the floor is yours.
Sure. I'm Cecilia Hoon, Finance Director for the Water Bureau. And Farshad Adadadi, BES's Business Services Manager, I think. Do I have your title right? Correctly, Farshad, and I will be doing the tag team. Yep. We also have Eric Pacheco with the Water Bureau Equity Manager in the room. And then, as Amy mentioned, both our Bureau Directors, Eddie Campbell, Water Bureau Director, and Don Uchiyama, BES's Director, also in the room to help with our presentation this morning. So we want to thank you for this opportunity to present our budget proposal that we are still working on. But to start out, we're talking about the utilities, essentially from faucet to force to faucet and from tap to river. Next slide, please. So a lot of work that we do on a daily basis, and we won't get into the specific of the work that we do for the most part, but certainly what we're about is to deliver safe, reliable services that protects public health and our environment. I believe our focus is really more about our finances for today. We'll cover our budget process, what we're working to put together as far as budget proposal that we need to be submitting to the city budget office by the end of next week. And we also heard from Pub that you would like to have us also be covering or reviewing the efficiencies that we've been doing over the last few years, or efficiency gains, as well as, what are the things that we are doing as far as increasing the efficiencies of the work that we do. And then, of course, equity consideration in our budget process, and then also equity impacts to our budget proposal. So what I'm starting out with is kind of covering the revenue, rates, fees, and charges. The utilities are both water and BES. Funding sources are from rate, fees, and charges. And you see the two donuts here, BES's revenue in green and water's in blue. Most of our revenues comes from the collection of revenues that we get from water, sewer, and stormwater bills. About 90 to 95% of that is from the big portion of the slices of the pie. Our services are based on the cost or the fees that we charge are based on the cost to provide the services that we offer. They are almost at full cost, 100% cost recovery, which means for the work that we do related to permit work, for example. We set those rates based on the efforts to perform that function. Not all our fees are at full cost recovery, but they are close. And our goal is to get to full cost recovery. And the reason for that is when fees are not at full cost recovery, then utility rates are needing, increased or at a rate that needs to subsidize for those. Given that we are fully funded by our own rates, fees, and charges, very little revenue that we collect from the general fund, less than 0.1%. Which means that our revenues has to cover for all of the work that we do. And that's operating our system, maintaining our system, and the reinvestment that we have to be doing to our system so that we can deliver the service that we provide 24/7. So I think the other thing that I would want to emphasize is that the funding that we receive are limited and restricted to the work that we perform. So water funds limited to be spent on work that we do related to water, sewer funds, or sewer and stormwater work. And for some of the maybe newer members that may not be aware, this was something that was litigated, last over 15 years ago now. And the consequences of that, of course, is that there were spending that the court basically ruled and say those are not appropriate use of utility funds, and the general fund had to reimburse the utilities for that. So we are very careful to make sure that the revenues that we collect are limited to spending on work that's related to the services that we provide. Next slide, please. So we do a long-term financial planning, and that is important to ensure that our planned investments to water, sewer, and stormwater systems are adequately funded. And again, as shown on the prior slide, a lot of our revenues comes from the water, sewer, and stormwater revenue that we collect for the services that we provide there. The current projection for rate increase that we have over this forecast period, 5 years, is water. At the time that we adopted the current budget, the forecast is 8.1% increase each year going forward through this forecast period. For BES, their forecast was 5.15 through 2028, and then drops to about 3.4% going forward. Please understand that it's a forecast. It's something that we update on an annual basis. Forecasts are adjusted based on the assumptions that goes in. So as inflation goes up or increases our cost, then we're having to increase rates to cover, again, assuming everything else being the same. So that is our forecast that we had. What we also strive to do is to make sure that our rate increases are smooth over the forecast period. So what we try to do is to avoid, the rate spike. What we don't want is, 3% one year and goes to 10% another year. Again, having a smooth rate increase provides that predictability on our utility bills. Next slide, please. Oh, by the way, Farshad, please do feel free to jump in and correct and add to what I'm saying.
Will do. You're doing great, Cecilia. Thanks.
All right. So the budget guidance to the utilities that we received last October was to have a lower rate increase than what we forecasted, essentially by about 5%. So what that means is for water, our projected rate increase of 8.1 needs to come in at 7.7%. For BES, their 5.15 needs to go down to 4.89%. And what that means basically is it means $1 million in less revenue than what we were projecting based on those forecasted rates. What we're illustrating here is to show you what that means to the customer. Our customer are seeing a 48 cents savings to their monthly bill. This is to the typical residential customer, single family. So again, the savings is 48 cents a month to the customer by having that 5% lower bill increase as opposed to what we were forecasting. But the impact to utilities is $1 million each for us that we, again, assuming everything else being the same, we would then be looking to have to reduce our costs because again, we have to make sure that our revenue covers our expenses. Next slide. This here shows the bill change that we would be expecting next fiscal year with that under the budget guidance directive that we got. Basically, an increase of 7.7% for water, BES 4.89%. For the typical residential customer, based on the current typical monthly bill, using 5 CCF, the increase would be $9.10 a month for the combined bill. For those customers that qualify for the low income assistance program, tier 1, those that are at 60% of median household income will see an increase of $4.59. Those qualifying for the Tier 2 program at 30% of MFI would see an increase of $1.86. Please understand that these are assuming 5 CCF, so 500 cubic feet of usage per month for the residential customer. What we have seen over the past few years is that the usage continues to drop, and it's likely to come from conservation and more efficient plumbing fixtures. We're now seeing closer to 4 CCF a month for those single family residential customers, again, at the median. So the median bills for the single family residential customers will likely see a bill increase closer to $125 as opposed to the $160 that we're showing on the graph. Again, we just want to kind of show that sort of same comparison, not to change the metrics there on some of this. Next slide, please. As far as where the money goes that we receive from the customer when we collect on that water, sewer, and stormwater bill, about 35 cents of that dollar goes to operation and maintenance of our existing system. So running the drinking water, sanitary sewer, and stormwater system requires constant year-round work, and our rates and charges help fund the operation and maintenance of the pipes, the water, the sewer treatment facilities, the reservoir, source protection that we have to be doing, the hydrants that you see on the corner, which we're finding to be very important that they're operational and is available and usable when we need them. Customer service, people that answers the phone when our customer call. We have a lot of regulations that we have to be complying with, so that covers that. Maintenance, again, maintenance of our systems and facilities. So these are essential work that keeps the drinking water safe, keeps the wastewater treatment process running smoothly, and manages our stormwater to reduce flooding risk and improve water quality. So 35 cents of every dollar goes to all that I just described. About 34 cents of that dollar goes to system improvement and expansion project. About a third of our public sewer and stormwater pipes are more than 80 years old. System improvement projects by the Water Bureau and BES is about repair and replacement of our aging pipes to improve water quality, to help protect people, property, and environment. So this work that we do to replace old pipes, upsizing pipes to increase capacity, restoring natural areas, and floodplains to manage flood, repair and upgrading our pump stations and other facilities to ensure that the systems work properly. Again, this is funding our, for water, our filtration plant project. About 23 cents of that dollar goes to debt service, and that's pretty much investments that we have made in the past. So part of the funding that both Water and BES get as far as or the funding that we do for the capital program comes from issuance of water and sewer bonds. That's essentially borrowing to do the work that we have to do. And that makes a lot of sense because all new facilities, if you think about buying a house, should be paid for over a long time for, you know, multiple generations to be paying for and the benefiting from those infrastructures. So 23 cents, you can imagine, is something that is already something that we have already done, dollars that we have spent that we're now paying back. Yeah, I think I covered all 4 slices there. Okay, next slide. So the budget. So that actually slips really well into sort of describing the donuts, the 2 donuts that we see. Capital improvement work is what we're doing now. As far as what we have in our capital plan, again, reinvesting in our system, building the facilities that we need to. And then we have that slice that's called debt service. I just talked about that. Prior investments that we have made to the system. And then we have the operating budget. And for the most part, there are labor, materials. It also includes in-city costs that we pay. So internal city costs to the city, facilities, technology, communications, we call risk. That's our liability, our insurance. All those kind of things are what we consider to be interagencies or internal service and materials. Then you have also utility license fee. That is the franchise fee that we pay 5% to the general fund for 5% of our revenue to the general fund. So everything that's in blue is what we consider to be something that we can't adjust when we're talking about reducing our budget. And that gets back to, you know, that $1 million that we are now looking to have to reduce to offset the $1 million less revenue as directed by the budget guidance. So what's left when we talk about reductions is looking at personal services and looking at the external material and services that we buy. So come back to that as well. Before I get into the specific of the proposals of where we have to reduce to offset the budget directive, the bureaus have been facing cost increases outside of just sort of the inflation, salary. We have internal city costs that we are also seeing significant increases in cost. So this is to show that the general fund overhead, that is supporting the city services that provides across the city. So council cost, human resources, HR. It includes the city's financial system, you know, those kind of costs where it cuts across the whole city is considered general fund overhead that we pay into to provide those services to us. And what we saw in water since 2020 to what we're projected to need to pay into that is doubled, 100% increase.
Cecilia,
Amy, can you advance the slide? Yeah,
Oh.
thanks.
Oh, I'm sorry. Events. So graph shows 100% for general fund overhead. Interagencies, again, those are services that we're receiving that we also have to pay into for facilities, for technology support. We're seeing about 45% increase to that. You can see our program cost is only going up 30, and there are definitely program costs related to labor. We have costs that are even going up above inflation that has to be paid for. That includes chemical, power costs. We've been seeing double-digit rate increases from PGE. So these are costs that I would consider to be, you know, not negotiable as far as having to pay for. And I believe BES, next slide, please.
Yep.
Is pretty much in that same boat, if not more. Their increase is even more extreme in those two buckets.
That's right, Cecilia. And there's a couple of points I want to make that refer to both of these charts. You'll see the yellow line in both of these charts denoted as inflation. I just want to be crystal clear that chart is, or that line, that time series is just there for reference. This is this consumer price index metric for inflation. There are various metrics for inflation. The CPI isn't always the best measure of inflation for utilities, large industrial organizations like BES and water, but it is what most of us experience on the day-to-day. So we thought it would be useful to include that just as a general indicator of how prices are increasing in the economy, and then just posing that with the cost increases that the Bureau is facing. And you can see the pretty significant difference in inflation for the bureaus. So essentially the same story. The differences in percentages between both bureaus really are driven by the differentials in our interagency agreements that exist, and the types of general fund usage that we have. But the general story is the same, that the central city costs that are rolling to the Bureau are very large, and they're growing at a faster rate than our programmatic expenses. So if as a utility, we have to pay for all of our expenses out of rate revenue. And over time, a larger portion of our rate revenue is going to pay for these internal costs and not actually directly benefiting our customers and the levels of service that we're delivering. I think that's a really important note to take away from these slides. Karen.
Hey, thanks, Farshad and Cecilia, for letting me interrupt. I think this is important from my understanding going forward. What is general fund overhead? What do we mean by that, and how does that affect both of the utilities?
So I'll take a stab, and if I missed any, Farshad, feel free to add. But general fund overhead, for the most part, are council costs, our financial system, central HR department, city budget office, attorney's office. It also, for the most part, that supports the whole city. We do have additional interagencies because they provide a very specified or specific support to our bureau sometimes. But labor relations is another one, or government relations is what I meant to say, is another one. So it's stuff where within most governments you'll see those type of offices that are in place that supports the whole city at large. That get at your question, Karen?
It does, and am I correct in understanding that is in addition to internal services
Yes.
charges?
Yes, and if you may want to think about internal services are more specific services that each of the bureaus are getting. So facilities, for example, it's based on the space, the size of the space that we're taking up in the Portland building, for example. Technology is based on the number of people that we're using, supporting our desktops, based on the number of desktops that we have. Same thing with communications. How many cell phones do we have? So it's very specific to the level of service that we're getting, or the quantity of those services that we're getting, are interagencies. General fund overhead are essentially services that we're getting. It's kind of like a support to the whole city or organization. And given that we're part of that, we're paying into that for that structure.
It's another way to put it, Karen, is it's those overhead charges needed to support general government function that are just allocated to each bureau. They're divvied up and then charged, whereas the interagencies are around the charges for specific levels of service of a internal service provider to the bureau. So those interagencies will differ from bureau to bureau, but the general fund are just kind of the global costs that are just divvied up amongst all the bureaus.
Thank you. Then, okay, so I don't understand why. I understand how they're different: internal services and general fund, more specific, general overall services. It seems there's a big difference in how much each has gone up, and it puzzles me why general fund overhead is 125%, is doubled plus. Maybe that'll come up in the rest of your presentation. But that might be helpful for my understanding as well. It's like how to interpret this information, like what it means to.
I would say that I'll take a stab at it, and this will be an incomplete answer, but I think it's accurate. These have been trending at a pretty steady rate for some years. I think in the last couple of years, particularly as Cecilia mentioned, the change in the form of government came along with a lot of costs to move from the previous state to the new state, and those are captured in frankly in both of these categories. But the change in the form of government isn't the only cost driver for why these have gone up. It has gotten more expensive to do everything, including provide these services, and so inflation is also impacting those internal service bureaus, and those inflationary costs are being passed on to the rest of the bureaus through general fund overhead and interagencies. There are other reasons as well, but I think those are some big drivers for the increases.
I agree.
Lorraine.
It's a follow-up to Karen's question. What is positions the 7.9%, the lowest on the chart
Mhm.
there? What does that represent?
That is the growth in the total number of positions budgeted to BES since the fiscal year 2019-2020. So the staff on BES has grown slightly year over year, and the cumulative growth over this whole time period is 7.9%.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I'll move on to the next slide here. We covered this in early December, our budget priorities for fiscal year 25-26. Of course, we start out with, it's really important that we continue to meet our regulations. We certainly want to be customer focused. Again, looking at, and we are clearly in an environment where we have to be reducing our budget. So we're trying to make reductions where it's least impactful to our customer. We need to maintain our system. We want to be coordinating as a service area. And then this last piece is reallocating existing resources to meet current needs. So those are the budget priorities that we are working under as far as budget development and what we will be proposing. Next slide, please. So I'm going to get into the specifics of what the Water Bureau will be proposing. Again, this is what we have today, and it's likely to continue to evolve as we receive additional information and guidance from the City Budget Office. Our budget approach or development approach at the Water Bureau is hold our budget, which means we're basically saying your dollars are the same. We're not even going to add inflation, which means you got to reallocate and reallocate your budget where you have greater needs by reducing somewhere else as best we can. And there's areas where we can't avoid it. I mean, again, chemical costs we're finding to be increasing at a double-digit rate. Our electricity are continuing to climb at much higher than inflation, which is what we essentially forecast and assumes. Our approach has been to try to avoid layoffs, which means when I start to get into our budget proposals, you'll see vacant positions is what we're looking to eliminate. And then we also, of course, have considered equity. And I'm going to actually turn this over to Eric at this point to ask him to cover the equity considerations in our budget development.
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. My name is Eric Pacheco. I'm the Equity and Policy Manager at the Portland Water Bureau. And we thought it was important to just give you a primer of how equity is woven into our budget. And later on in the presentation, I'll talk about some of the impacts of the proposed budget changes. But one of the things we've done intentionally is rather not to create an equity line item in our budget, and instead really focus on changing how we do our work. In most instances, what we do didn't really change, but how we do it and how we prioritize it changed it. And so we have 7 budget programs and 22 budget sub-programs. And so one of the things we did is ensure that every action in our equity plan, there were 73 of them to be specific, was embedded into the descriptions of those budget programs and sub-programs. So an example is, we look at the condition of our and distribution of our hydrants or our mains or main breaks and overlay that onto demographic and geographic information to see if there's variances across service levels. And if there are, then we can allocate funding to ensure that we're not having disparate impacts across our service area. And so different ways we've done that is we've updated our asset management methodology to integrate community vulnerability data so that we are investing resources in the places of the city where a consequence of system failure would lead to more acute consequences. And we've done similar thing with how we prioritize our projects or how we integrate community data into our project design and construction or our emergency management response. I think you know that between Water and BS, we created an equity data toolkit to precisely help us integrate community data with infrastructure data. And we've done similar things with how we allocate funding for language and disability access. We now have a dedicated pot of funding that is woven into our budget, but also just reallocate existing sources of funding to create things like a Spanish phone tree for our call center. So now when people call, they can hit 9 for Spanish or create a community engagement strategy. We've created dedicated teams for employee experience and people operations. So everything that has to do with payroll and also developed, accessibility policies, equitable contracting work. And so again, just reframing from saying we don't have a dedicated equity line item. It's just, as I like to say, it's kind of woven or beat into the batter. So we can't really separate one thing from the other. It does put us in a position where we can kind of prioritize and adjust depending on various different factors and what the data is telling us at any given point in time. And the reason I like to highlight that is that we don't necessarily approach our equity in our budget from a year-to-year basis, but more on a long-term horizon based on the equity goals that we've established for ourselves. And those are the ones that you can see here on the screen: system reliability, community relations, workforce, organizational processes, and accountability and leadership. And so we are almost 5 years into the creation of our equity plan. And most of our actions have either been completed or are being implemented. Those things that are being implemented is what I call our evergreens. They're just changes we've made to processes or procedures or practices. And so they're going to be, in this new kind of equitable status moving forward. But we still have a few things that are in design around our affordability work and some of our workforce work, particularly because those two teams are fairly new. But here on the left, you can see some of the dedicated human resources we have to doing equity work in the Bureau. In addition to the equity and policy team, we have workforce specific teams, but also analysts in our procurement team, our contracting team, and also in our asset management team that are ensuring that the work is done in a way that's equitable and that helps inform how we allocate resources in the Bureau.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself again before I start talking too much. So what I'm going to be sharing over the next several slides are, again, Water Bureau's approach to balancing our budget. And a lot of these are what we have today. It's possible that we will be adjusting them as we receive information. It's very likely that we'll be adjusting them even after the budget is submitted next week. As we continue through the process through the spring and with the mayor's proposed, we anticipate more adjustment is expected. So starting with the budget directive, again, $1 million less in revenue requires us to find cost or reductions elsewhere to offset. We have identified 8 vacant positions to eliminate to offset that. They include a park technician, 4 distribution worker trainee, and a manager in the environmental regulatory area. We have an analyst 3 and environmental specialist. And let me just sort of high level share the impacts, operational impacts, and then Eric's going to come back on to just talk broadly about the equity impacts related to our budget proposals. With the park technician, that's somebody that basically goes out and maintain our grounds facilities on our property, the grounds. So what's likely going to be happening there with the loss of that position is we're just going to have to do less, right? Less maintenance, probably less mowing of some of those properties is the impact. We have 4 trainee positions that we would need to be eliminating to offset that loss in revenue. Our experience is much of our field staff actually came through our apprentice and training programs. So we added these positions 2 years ago. We had to eliminate half of them last year. These are the other 4 that we had added that we will now have to eliminate. What we were hoping to do with these is, of course, understanding that a lot of our field supervisors and manager actually came through the training program, through our journey level positions and into supervisory and manager positions, that we want to, again, broaden that workforce to do more sort of that, diverse hiring and, over time, create a more diverse workforce, which is one of our equity goals. Our environmental regulatory manager, that person oversees and works on source protection. Obviously, it's really important that our water remains of high quality. What we'll also be losing in this losing this position is the expertise that we would otherwise have on natural resource policy and planning. Our analyst 3 position was a position that worked on our strategic plan. Our strategic plan, of course, now is outdated. Our goal was to work on updating it. Of course, we will be working on that, as a service area going forward. But we won't have the resource to be working on that. And that will be a challenge when the service area as a whole start working on a strategic plan. Our environmental specialist position is one that works in the groundwater and distribution monitoring program. So what we're losing there is somebody to be doing some of that monitoring work that we do around groundwater and in our distribution system. So less happens essentially all around with those 8 positions. Next slide. The next grouping is we talked about increase to inside city cost. What we saw is, again, higher interagencies with some offsets. We did see some reductions in some areas. It's still $1.5 million more than what we forecasted. We do assume an increase in those areas, but it's closer to 3% is our assumption. So we're obviously seeing significant increases. Largely for us is the CD fleet relocation to from the Kirby Garage to Swan Island. That was a big ticket item for us. We do have a lot of fleet. The cruise goes out, the equipment that they use. Procurement is another area we saw an increase on related to all of the contracting work that we've been doing related to the filtration project. And then risk and liability, that's our insurance. And understand insurance has been going up since the pandemic quite a bit by double digits as well each year. To offset those increases in cost, we have yet another 8 positions that we have identified that we will need to eliminate to offset the cost. So again, operationally, the water service inspector is one that goes out and addresses customers' issues out in the field. So we'll have less resources if that position is cut. Our engineering 3 is one that works on, of course, our infrastructure, working on capital projects related to maintaining our system. Our engineering technician is one that manages our record. So the risk there, of course, is our records are not maybe as kept up to date as we would like to see. And that's, unfortunately, it is something that's important. We need to know where our infrastructure is. But again, that is one that is vacant, and that is probably least impactful compared to everything, all the other vacant positions that we have on our list that we need to be backfilling and hire. And engineer 2, also one that is working on our in our engineering group in infrastructure planning. So we have to do a lot of capital planning work, understanding which facilities we ought to be doing the maintenance on. So that's an engineer that position that we will likely lose to offset the cost. The senior engineering associate is one that is in our asset management group. And asset management is certainly a very helpful area to help us understand, you know, what's sort of the areas where we should be better investing our resources. Cybersecurity is a position that we added a couple of years ago that we have not been able to fill. Again, in light of, you know, knowing that, you know, we will need to be trimming back on our budget, we held it vacant. And I think it was one that we were also considering reducing or eliminating last year. We didn't have to. We were very fortunate, but we still wasn't able to fill it, and we're now looking to eliminate it. And it's one, of course, that we were hoping to have to help safeguard our system from cyber attacks. A deputy director position is, of course, one that we will lose capacity at the leadership level. And then our water meter tech is one that works on our meters. You know, one that tests our meters to make sure that they're reading accurately, and so forth. So that's that grouping of positions that we would have to eliminate to offset increased cost. Next slide, please. I think Farshad mentioned changing form of government. We're seeing increased costs there as the city restructure to be more supportive of the new city organization. What we're experiencing is we'll need to be, we're expecting that there will be an increase in the city leadership structure that we will need to find roughly 300,000. This is the information that we have so far. We're expecting this information to be updated. For now, we're assuming that we will have to find or have two positions that will be transferred to our deputy city administrator office. These two positions that we have identified are the water meter tech, water meter reader position. Imagine that's a person that actually goes out and read our meters for billing. We also identified an administrative specialist 2 position that will likely need to transfer to our DCA office. And that, of course, is administrative support to our managers, our technical staff, or professional staff. So, you know, not having that means everybody else is having to do a little bit more of what the support that they used to get. Next slide. There is a proposal from the Bureau of Parks. And let me give you a little background before I get into how we're going to address it. City Council transferred, I don't want to say back in I want to say 1988. I forgot to put my date, but I believe it was in 1988 that the City Council transferred the responsibilities of about 19 decorative fountains basically to operate and maintain to the Water Bureau. And these includes, you know, the Salmon Street fountains, the Jameson fountains. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, it's the Holiday Park fountains, the McCoy Park fountains, Bill Natal, and the waterfront, you know, the Salmon Spring fountains. So there are 19 of them throughout the downtown core area that were parks. They built them. City transferred them to the Water Bureau to operate and maintain them. In about starting in 2013 or so, we had an interagency with the Parks Bureau to start operating and maintaining them. The responsibility of the ownership of those fountains remained with water. So Water Bureau paid Parks to do that operations and maintenance starting in around 2013. We've been increasing their interagency in the last few years by inflation. And the reality is the cost of labor and materials is probably went up by more than that. So the Parks Bureau basically came to us and said, okay, for them to be at cost of service to do that work for us, the interagency needs to go up by $300,000. So this is one that we are still in negotiation with the Parks Bureau to understand, to see if there are opportunities to reduce the level of service on those fountains. So that, you know, the cost increase isn't as great. But if we do have to be paying parks 300,000 more, something else has to give. So what we will be doing is reducing the budget that we have to maintain our facilities. And that's our sort of offset to that proposal that is out there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and ask him to cover the equity impacts of those proposals that I covered.
Yeah, thank you, Cecilia. I will start just by saying that anything that impacts our levels of service, directly or indirectly, of course, has an equity implication. And we do know that it is the most vulnerable people in our communities that are least likely to be able to withstand some of those shocks and impacts that may come from deferred maintenance or other impacts to levels of service. So kind of putting aside some of those indirect impacts in the short term, you know, we, as Cecilia mentioned, we used to have a dedicated team of people dedicated to strategic planning. We actually lost a position earlier in a previous year. So now with this one, the bigger impact is, you know, how do we manage all of these transitions and all of the alignment with the city and the public works service area, navigating all this changing. And we're asking a lot of our staff, of course, cutting a lot of positions over the years. Both our strategic plan, which is already ended last year, and our equity plan ends this year, and we had plan on integrating both of those efforts so that rather than having two separate plans, we would have a strategic plan that centered equity, which is the way we've been wanting to do this. So, you know, this not having these positions, of course, lessens our capacity to manage change. And then the other big impact is water worker trainee positions. We had created this program a few years ago. We had initially created 8 positions. I think we had to get rid of some of them last year, and now getting rid of the remainder this year. And so this is a planned investment that we were just not able to implement. You know, this program was never able to get going just because as soon as we created it and funded it, we had to kind of put it on hold. And these are entry-level positions that have a lot of development and growth opportunities within our bureau, but also within our sister bureaus and other government positions. And we see that these types of positions are the ones that tend to help us diversify our workforce. And so those are the two most immediate impacts to some of our equity goals. But not the only ones, as I mentioned. There are some other indirect impacts that are kind of hard to quantify.
Thanks, Eric. I'm doing a time check on myself because I want to make sure that I leave some time for Shad to go over the BES's budget proposal. So I'm going to talk even a little faster just so that I can at least cover some of this information and again leave some time for Shad. I suspect that the PowerPoint will be shared with Pub so you can come back and read a lot of the verbiage that are actually on the slide. So, you know, I went through all of the proposed cuts. We have been doing some reductions largely because we've been reallocating our existing staff, reassigning the work that some of our staff are doing. We basically say, we can't afford to have you do this work anymore. Please come over here is a higher priority for you. Please understand that all reductions, even when we do reassignments of work, there is an impact to our service delivery and maintenance of the system because they were doing something else. I would say there's no one staff in the Bureau that, you know, does not contribute to service delivery and maintaining our system for the most part in some way. So while we can sustain these reductions in the short term, these are resources that we will need to find ways to add back, especially if we cannot find alternatives to getting that work done. So the thing that we have done as far as, you know, covering for the reductions, we reassign work. I had a property manager where he was, part of his job was to take our surplus properties that we no longer need, sell them so that there's additional resources coming into the Bureau, dollars. And we basically say, let's not do that. It's more important for us to be maintaining our facilities. So we shifted his duties, halted that program. We did quite a few of those in the last 5 years or so, as far as selling off surplus property and getting the money in the door. But we need to shift his priorities and responsibilities to maintaining our system. So that's just one example of reassignment of the work that we have done. Slower response time, you can imagine, fewer resources. It's just going to take us a little longer to get to things. There are things that we no longer do. And, you know, one example I have on the list is performance metrics. We used to do a lot more of that. I would say we do the bare minimum in that area right now. There's work that we are delaying or just isn't able to get to as we had hoped. Cybersecurity was one that we mentioned. Strategic planning is another. Next slide, please. So the other thing we heard from Pub is, you know, what are some of the efficiencies that we have been doing? We have been reducing our overall facilities footprints and the costs associated with that as a way to save facilities cost. Energy efficiency is one that we are also doing, is to modify our operation, use less energy. In our field area, our workforce there is trained in a way that is much more flexible. So we've been able to do more work as a result. We have more flex schedule using remote technology. So a lot of our training, especially for our field staff, are done remotely, especially during times when they can't be out. So during inclement weather, I remember there were times when the air quality was so poor, we didn't want our field staff to be working outdoor. We said, do your training. Those are required training that needs to happen. So those are great opportunities to do, and we have done that. Leak detection is another one that we've been able to save some staff time. We're doing satellite leak detection, giving us a sense of where the leaks are, as opposed to having, you know, people go out and do that. Next slide. Things that we are still, obviously, lots that we are working on. The areas that are that we will see more efficiencies is with customer service and billing. We're doing mobile service orders, implementing that. Customer engagement portal, our AMI project is underway. Those are all going to provide a lot of efficiencies for us. We have technology projects that are also underway to help with reducing paperwork, being more efficient in our processes. Again, I'm sorry to have gone through those so quickly, but I want to make sure that I leave time for Fashad. I do want to take some time, next slide, please, to kind of cover still what we consider to be the known unknowns. So I talked about the proposals. They're very specific as far as the reductions that we have to make to what we know today. And we still have a lot of things out there that are hanging out there, and we won't know probably until the mayor's proposed. We understand that the employee health benefit cost may be higher than what we are assuming right now. There are 3 labor agreements that are under negotiation that may result in increased labor costs to us, not just to water and BES, but obviously the whole city as a whole. The changing form of government, the city reorg, council offices, all of those are going to be additional cost, depending on, some of the decisions that would be made around all of that. And then there are, of course, programs that council funded with one-time resources that if they continue, and if it's a program that we contribute into, we'll need to continue. That is not in our forecast right now. So those are the unknown of the stuff that we know that are hanging out there that has a cost risk to us. Our proposal to offset, again, we don't know how much in any of those is going to be. But what we're looking at right now is we have what we call a convenience fee. When customers pay their water, sewer, and stormwater bill, they're using their credit cards to pay. They're doing ACH or transfers from their account. The credit card fees that credit card company charges when customers uses them to pay their bill is something that the Water Bureau has been paying on customers' behalf. And it's actually more standard for customers to be paying that when they're using their credit card to pay their bills. There's a fee that the credit card company charges, and that would be something that the customer would and should be paying. So that is something that we're looking at, is that we no longer pay that on our customers' behalf, and that will help with reducing our cost for that service that we currently provide. We would need to likely identify more vacant positions to eliminate, to offset, again, some of those cost risks that I mentioned. We'll want to be looking at, materials and services. Again, there's not a lot there anymore. What's there is to support the people to get their work done. And then we'll have to look at programmatic cuts, and that could result in layoffs. And that would be the very last option that we would be exploring. We would have exhausted all of the other options and all of the areas for opportunities to reduce our budget if we have to go there. Again, we just don't know how much of these cost risk are results in as far as dollars that we have to be offsetting. So I'm gonna pause there and turn it over to Farshad so he has some time to cover BES's proposal.
I'm going to take just 1 minute before Farshad. I'd like to leave as much of the remaining time. Anything else that we had, announcements and others, I can send out to folks outside of the meeting. But I just want to make sure that there's not any clarification questions, because that was a lot of information that was covered. And while it's fresh, if there's questions that folks have as far as clarification of something that you heard, now would be a good time to raise that before we move on. If it's a more in-depth question that isn't one that we expect there would be an answer in real time right now, and it's something that, some research would need to be done, then those could be sent to me outside of the meeting, and we'll follow up with the Bureau leads to get answers to that. Given the time that we have and the importance of all the information that's being covered, I think once we get through any clarification questions, then Farshad will get started on some of the BES information, and then we'll continue the presentation and conversation at the next meeting, if that works for everybody, because we want to make sure that we give sufficient time to really understand it. Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, Lauren speaking, voting member. I was just gonna see if we could maybe get a copy of this, so that way we could have some time to read through it, and maybe, because you're right, it is a lot of information. It's really appreciated. I would like to sit with it a bit, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I will send it out as soon as we're done with the meeting.
Perfect, thank you.
All right, am I on, Amy?
Yeah, go ahead, Farshad, and if
Okay.
People have clarification questions, they can raise them as we go.
That's excellent. I want to start just by sharing my appreciation for both Cecilia and Eric. For sake of time, I'm gonna say that me too. a lot of the content, there's a BES spin to it, but categorically, in terms of how equity is woven in to our organization and our financial choices, and the impacts, they're going to sound very similar. So what I'd like to do today in the time that I have left is maybe focus on kind of jumping to the budget portion, and then if we have time to come back, I can go into a deeper dive on the equity and operational impacts of these choices, just so you have a sense of what's out there. I know you guys will have the presentation shortly, but maybe that'll be a quick way just to orient you to what BES's experience is. Here are just quickly the budget priorities within BES specific that we were operating under. I think it's important to note that we are in the midst of a multi-year effort to realign our resources and investments to where our greatest needs are in our organization. And based on the risks and operational needs, the greatest priority areas in our organization are to support the treatment and pumping functions at the plant and around our community. This is both to meet regulatory compliance, but it's also to assure that the levels of service for our community and the quality of the employee experience is higher, and that the employees are working in safe conditions. So that's a top priority for us. Of course, regulatory compliance and delivery of core services are always essential. The direction that the Dawn and the leadership team have been operating under is that we need to live within our means by seeking efficiencies and reductions when those expenses are no longer needed, and where there are new needs to first seek existing resources to reallocate. That's a similar theme to what you've heard Cecilia talk about. And again, similarly, we are in the midst of a significant city reorganization and the establishment of the Public Works Service Area. Those new bureaucracies come with a price tag, and we need to pay our share for those costs. And it's always front of mind for employees. And because of the nature of the financial constraints that we're operating in, we couldn't eliminate layoffs as an option that we would have to consider, but we did commit, as Water did, that layoffs of filled positions would be the last choice after every other choice was exhausted. So those are kind of our general priorities and guidance. We have a handful of tools that we use to direct our decision making. We have our racial equity plan, and every year we use what are called the budget equity strategy tools, or BESTs, to help shape our budgeting decisions. We also use portfolio management tools, asset management tools, which include an assessment of our levels of service and risk. And we this year we have the benefit of a self-assessment of the EUM, the Effective Utility Management Framework, to help guide our investment choices. So this is kind of the foundational raw material that we were using to guide our decisions. Next slide, please. So similar to water, we had one specific bit of budget guidance, but it's not the whole picture. We also had to reduce our expenditures to match a reduction of revenue of $1 million. We identified about $1.1 million of reductions, largely in the form of external services, professional and brokerage services reductions, and our space leasing budget, in addition to some modest reductions in our strategy and integrated planning groups. So no personnel were directly impacted, or vacant positions were directly impacted in our meeting the mayor's budget guidance. However, if you go to the next slide, those increased city costs for BES are exceeding $5 million. Again, a reminder that when we're talking about increased city costs, we're talking about BES's share of the general fund overhead, BES's specific interagency agreements, and additional labor costs that were above forecast. So we have identified through our internal processes, we've identified savings of over $6 million. Want to be clear that this $6 million of savings is inclusive of the $1 million to meet the mayor's budget guidance. So in broad strokes, and we can get into more details here, but this is kind of a fluid set of decisions that we're making, and we're making adjustments daily based on information that we're getting from staff and from CBO. But in broad categories, we're making net reductions to programmatic expenditures of $2.4 million. This is, again, if you think about those orange slices of the donut, this is reduction in personnel through net reduction of one vacant position, and then other reductions for external services, materials, and contracts needed to do our work. I want to take a second to talk about what I mean by net reduction. We identified about half a dozen positions, vacant positions that we wanted to reduce. And then we had slightly fewer new positions that we needed to add. And so when we looked at those lists of adds and reductions, we know that we're going to, on balance, reduce our staff size by one position. However, some teams will be getting new positions, but we will be, as per our budget priorities, we will be repurposing those reduced positions, reclassifying them to meet where the additions are needed. So we're trying to manage this again within our current resource level. We are also constantly reviewing our capital improvement program, our CIP, to make sure that we have those projects prioritized and sequenced efficiently. And we have identified $20 million of CIP projects that are less urgent. Everything in our CIP is very important and contributes to the quality of our system and delivering services to our community. But there are some that can be deferred. And we identified $20 million of projects that we are taking out of our CIP. And the effect of that is that we'll have to borrow less, $20 million less, which then generates debt service savings of $1.3 million annually. Since we don't have to borrow, then we don't have to pay the interest and principal on that borrowing, which is a cost savings for us. We're also making $3 million of reductions to planned savings for our environmental remediation obligations and the implementation of our capitalization policy. These are hopefully will be one-time reductions that we will need to make up in future years, because both of these savings categories are critical for us. But given the financial constraints we're in, we felt we could afford a reduction in the savings levels this year. And then in future years, we would get back on track. So that is how we're meeting the net reductions that we're anticipating of $6 million to the Bureau. The first $1 million is to meet the mayor's guidance, and an additional $5 million plus from those increased city costs. Next slide. We are needing to support the establishment of the DCA's office and the change in form of government. We are currently paying for one of those positions in the DCA's office, which was unbudgeted, and we actually don't have a position to use right now. So it's what's called a double fill. I won't get into the technical explanation of that here, but essentially that's about $200,000 of unbudgeted expense that we're needing to cover through other reductions. Next slide. I'm going to skip the equity considerations for when I come back, but you'll have these slides when the deck is distributed, and very similar to the water presentation. We have some general categories, and these categories are integral. They're not a single line item, and so it's going to be hard to quantify, and that's work that we are looking into. But a lot of positive work continues even through these budget reductions to support our racial equity plan. Next slide. And similarly to water, we are making our budget based off of what are the knowns. There are still unknowns out there that we are expecting to see materialize soon. Those are only likely to increase our costs, which means that we're going to have to go through another round of looking for reductions in the coming weeks and months. I know that we'll be coordinating with the pub as that information becomes known. I won't get into this. I think Cecilia covered much of this information. It's the same for BES. So that was my lightning round. Hopefully it just gives you a taste of it, and I can go into more depth at the next meeting if necessary. Lorraine.
Thanks, Rashad. Lorraine Wilson, pub voting member. I have several questions, or clarifying questions. So you mentioned that you all are doing some space, what's the term you use? What's the technical term? Where you're consolidating space, I believe.
So we did consolidate. We had a pretty significant footprint in a downtown office building, and we've since brought everybody from that space. It was the Pioneer Tower. We brought everybody from the Pioneer Tower into the Portland building, and that generated last year, that generated an ongoing annual savings of $1 million. What I noted in our presentation today is that we do have a budget for lease expense that we tap into often, and we are reducing that budget amount significantly this year.
So is it, can I assume, which is a dangerous thing, that that space consolidation is based on the current arrangement with city staff that they will 2.5 days? So it's like sharing of what was the term they used, these commuters desk and all that stuff?
Oh, hoteling, I think.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So how does this align with the direction that the mayor seems to be going in bringing staff back 5 days a week? Because I think it's just recently on the newspaper, there's a directive that went out for managers and supervisors to be back in the office. How is this aligned or misaligned?
That's a very good question. I can speak for BES. We have everybody who is required to be in the office half-time or more. And this was true prior to the mayor's announcement, has a location assigned. We have several employees that have been approved for full-time remote based on the nature of their work. The mayor's direction does not impact those people. But it is true that if this directive expands beyond managers and supervisors, and it could create some immediate space issues for BES. I don't know if that is imminent, but we did develop our current space plan on the assumption that a certain number of staff would continue to be authorized to work remote full-time, and that that we would be able to have some portion of our staff hybrid so that we could share space. If any of those assumptions stop being true, then we will have a space crunch.
And in addition, it will nullify the so-called cost savings, right?
Well,
or am I assuming
if
too much?
we are required to find new space to accommodate these new working arrangements, absolutely.
Okay. The second one, and I want to be quick because I want to allow everybody else to have vacancies. A vacant position, when a position is not filled, there is actually cost savings. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if there, you all mentioned that you all are going to propose the elimination of certain position, which will result in a reduction. Is this just a accounting? This is just like figures or whatever on an accounting sheet?
No. And again, I'll speak for BES. Within BES, we typically have between 12 and 25, 30 vacancies at any one time, just based on the natural turnover of our employees in an organization of our size. And we do realize savings when those positions aren't filled. The positions that we're offering to reduce we have every intention of filling. And we are assuming that if we didn't have to reduce them, we're assuming that they would be filled, and that's where the cost savings would come from. I take your point. They're vacant now and they're not generating expenses, but it is our intention to fill those positions. And looking forward, we're eliminating the budget for those positions along with the position itself. So the opportunity to fill those positions is now gone.
And finally, and this is for both bureaus, you know, the positions that are seeming to be eliminated that are vacant, you know, there's environmental, there are key things, key positions, and the majority of them, of course, are lower level staffing. As we all know, with the new government structure, there has been a whole layer, senior, high-paying jobs that have been created without really the city's operation changing drastically. So the form of government has changed, but what the city does hasn't changed. And there's a whole layer of the DCA and then the deputy DC. And I would really like to see a org chart. And then there's the bureau director, and then there's the deputy bureau director, and then there is the leadership team on the bureaus and all these things. But what we are seeing being impacted are these jobs, the actual people who do the work. And that's an assumption I'm making, but an analyst, you know, the person who goes out and physically looks at property and make sure that it's well taken care of and all these things, you know, the programming that was designed to create more diverse staff opportunities of the guys who keep the stuff working in Water Bureau and stuff. So I don't know if it's a question, more of a statement and a concern, but I would love to see the organization chart and how it flows out and how it seems like the upper level is dense, from deputy bureau director all the way up to city administrator. There's a dense layer of high paying, impactful jobs, which will probably go back to the massive percentage increase that we saw in one of the initial charts where you were showing that support for that leadership that Karen asked that question. So I just wanted to point that out. And finally, it is concerning to me that BES presented its budget without an equity team, because I'm going to say this, my position is that equity is as important as a budget, right? And no bureau will present their budget without a budget manager. So I just wanted to put that in. So thank you, Farshad. And thank you, Water Bureau budget person. It's slipping me right now.
Dawn, I saw you raise your hand. Do you have some additional information or response you'd like to provide?
Yeah, just quickly, again, sensitive to time. Thank you for your comments, Serene. I would like to address getting you the org charts and acknowledge that I think everyone understands the concern that you've expressed, and I'm expecting that the city administrator, we've also received an email about, you know, organizational changes and cost savings. And so I think there are future discussions about where those cost savings can be realized. And I don't think you should assume that it's with the analyst positions. I don't have the detail for that, but I can assure you that those conversations are happening. And we can make every effort to make sure Priya is here and that PUB gets updated on those conversations. Priya is the closest to those.
Thanks, Dawn. And I just wanted to reiterate, this is the reason my concern, I've been raising this concern about equity and the city's commitment to equity. And I think it's just 2 days or 3 days ago, there was an article in the papers that spoke about that the city is going to be cutting equity. There was a whole article about it. So I think my concerns are well founded, and I go back and I will say it again, and you all get fed up saying me. We as a pub needs to determine if we are misaligned with the direction of the city. And that's a serious question we need to address.
Thank you, Lorraine. Kyle, I think you'll be the final for today. And so before you begin, I'll just say if there's other questions, I will hang on and folks can chat with me, or you can send me information outside of the meeting, and then we'll continue the conversation at the next one. Kyle, go ahead.
Thank you, Amy. Kyle Chipman, voting member. This question may apply more directly to water, but to both bureaus. As specifically vacant positions have been eliminated and the work will flow to existing team members, how great of a concern is employee attrition rates or departure rates to you? In the interest of not having someone leave and bearing the cost of hiring and retraining what is a filled position? And do you have any kind of like employee satisfaction metrics or performance reviews or things that can kind of help you keep a gauge on how people are feeling on the team?
I'll venture out on that one. Thank you for that very insightful question. We have engagement survey data. It is not particularly fresh at this point. It's probably about 2 to 3 years old at this time. So it would not include the impacts of some of the reductions that we took last year and moving into this next year. So what my provisional answer would be, we can give you some, relatively old data that talks and shows kind of employee engagement levels and the level of retainment and tenure that we have within the Bureau. We have all that stats, but it won't be as fresh to cover this period of time over the last 2 years in which we're seeing these impacts. So that's work we'll probably should, and I would recommend that we revisit and update that work so that we can track the dynamic that you're describing.
Thank you. And no need to kind of take the time to summon up old data. It's more asking, kind of being thoughtful and mindful of what could become a kind of a challenge that creates its own momentum.
Yeah, and I think there are some risks right now for the city in terms of the transition itself. I think is creating some dynamics that go well beyond even the impacts that the strict budget impacts are having on our workforce. And so I would expect that the attrition rate and the transitions out of the city will accelerate over the next several months.
All right, with that, we are at time. So I just want to thank everybody, Cecilia, Farshad, Don, Eddie, Eric, and others, as well as pub members for your conversation today. I will call this meeting adjourned, and we will touch base at the upcoming meeting and continue the conversation. So if you have questions in between, please reach out to me.
Thanks, everyone.